Hi. Today we're going to be looking at starting with Psalms 15. And it's a very interesting psalm, and it's about manliness, it's about kingness. It's about, he's stating that, Lord, who can abide in your tabernacle? Who can dwell on your holy hill? He who walks upright and worketh righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. See, this is the key. We've got a king, or he's on king in training. I believe many of the things that David was going through as a shepherd prepared him to be the warrior, then prepared him to be a king. Sometimes we men, and I'll speak to us, that we don't go through the warrior role. We don't go through being a shepherd and a warrior. We want to just be the king of the castle or the king of this, or we have high expectations of this or that. You have to pay your dues. He said, he backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doeth evil to his neighbor. He putteth not money up to usury. He does things that shall not be moved. So this is a strong kingly psalm from a man who either was king at the time or would be king. And I think it's something to look at like that. He walks uprightly and worketh righteousness. Is what you're doing righteous? Is what you're doing is right? Is what you're doing good in the moment? So I think there's a challenge in some of these psalms that is implied, that this is what you need to be doing on a daily basis, and this will prepare you for reigning, if you should be reigning in some way, state, or form. So looking at it's a small 5-verse psalm, but I think there's a lot packed in there. It says, in whose eyes a vile person is condemned, but he honors them that fear the Lord. So we do have honor with one another, especially those that fear the Lord. Going back to Genesis. And it's interesting here that we're looking at some interesting things in Genesis. And get over here. That in Genesis 29 and 30 is where I'm going, because Jacob has just left with it from Esau. He and his he has had this the stealing of the birthright through the deception with his father, and then also this anger with his brother. And his mom tells him to go stay with her brother for a few days till Esau gets over it and you can come back. That would actually be more than 14 years. And so we also went through, he had this dream in Bethel, and God reiterated the promise that he had made to Abraham and Isaac, and that Isaac had given to Jacob. Even though Jacob had taken this through deception, the blessing was still there. In fact, God had told Isaac that it would be the younger serving the elder. So he should have actually brought Jacob in to obey God. Now, I don't know what would have happened had he done that. Maybe they wouldn't have gone to see Laban. Maybe he would have gone over there and properly got Rachel to be his wife and brought her back. We don't know exactly what would have been along that line, but we do know that there was a lot of deception here, and there's fault going around. And so Isaac goes off. He has his dream, and when he gets there, he notices that there's a bunch of sheep and there's some shepherds, and he asks if anybody knew Laban, and they go, yes, here comes his daughter Rachel. So he sees Rachel's coming. He unblocks the water so that the sheep might be fed and might drink. He goes over and sees Rachel and kisses her and lifts up his voice and wept. Sometimes we over-romanticize this moment. We'll see later that Laban gets a kiss. It seems like many times in this culture, a term of affection, a term of family, a kiss on the cheek kind of thing. We still do that thing with grandma and aunts and all this kind of stuff. So we don't want to infer too much on this. And he also may have heard the story about what happened between his mom and dad, how God had moved to bring Rebekah into Isaac's life. And he might see, maybe this is what God's doing with me. He's automatically bringing this girl in my life. So this is God's will for my life. I know sometimes we're guilty of putting God on a cookie cutter. If he does something one way, we will just look for that same way. But sometimes you really need to go to God and see, well, which way is he using right now? I try to use these scriptures kind of like I would a toolbox. Some situations call for a 1/2-inch wrench. Some situations call for a 9/16 wrench. Some situations call for some pliers and a Phillips screwdrivers. Some call for a flathead screwdriver and a crescent wrench. You know, there's different things that you'll use to deal with the issue and the problem. And many times using these stories, using these examples, shows us how to use, what to do, what not to do, what situation. Using New Testament truths. Do you count the cost, or do you just have faith? Which one do you do? It sounds like they're counterintuitive. Well, many times the situation would be stop and count the cost. Other times the situation would be have faith and move forward. Show some perseverance, show some patience, show some self-control. Which is which? Well, as a Bible believer, your job is to know the scripture so well that you can pull out the tool for the situation. So he meets Rachel, and he goes and meets Laban. Now, Laban turns into a really smooth operator. I mean, Jacob probably thought he was the king deceiver. He probably he found the easy way of doing things. I get a feeling that he's the guy that hung around the house and did the little bitty jobs, while Esau went out and did the hard work. You know, that he was purposely hanging around where softer things could be done. And he thought he was the king deceiver, but he's going to meet somebody that's going to take him for a ride. Laban meets him. Laban says that you're flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. And he abode with him for a month, and he just smoothed him. He just brought him into the fold. You are my family. I love you. I mean, I'm kind of inferring some things in here. But he does really good for Laban, for Jacob. And Jacob approaches about marrying Rachel. And Laban's like, you can do that. Just serve me for 7 years, and then you can have Rachel. He goes, okay, that's a cool deal. So he goes into the employment of Laban, works under Laban. He does get wages, and he's able to build his own little house, his own little structures. He's able to build his own little, probably his own little flock. But his responsibility is to Laban and Laban's flock and Laban's life. So after 7 years, he is told that he can have Rachel. So they have this big party. And at that night, he goes into his bride. But the next morning, as you know the story, he wakes up and it's Leah. And he's lit. What's going on here? I was promised one woman. And Laban comes up with a lame excuse. Well, don't you know in our country that we have to have the older get married before the younger? But I'll tell you what, I'll do you a solid. Work for me another 7 years. You can have Rachel just work for me another 7 years. Finish out this week for Leah, and you can have Rachel. So you can imagine how that week went. You know, he's hanging around with his new bride. She's feeling unloved. Rachel's over there making eyes, and it's just a big problem. He finishes his week. He agrees to do the 7 years, and then he goes into to Rachel, and Rachel becomes his wife. Each one of them are given handmaids that later will become concubines. And the Lord saw that Leah was hated and opened her womb. And it's interesting, there's a psychology going on with Leah here that I'm really interested to see. He has a son. She has a son, calls him Reuben. And it says, surely Yahweh has looked upon my affliction. She has a second son named Simeon, because Yahweh has heard that I was hated. She has a third son that says, now my husband will be joined to me. So again, and then her fourth son comes along, and she says, I will praise Yahweh, and his name was Judah. So you got the first boys, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. But she praises Yahweh. She praises the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And you get the idea that Yahweh is known, Jehovah, is known to these people, that he's just not worshipped. They're worshiping other gods. Later in the story, we'll find out that Nahor, of course, has his own gods. But here, she seems to have an affinity for this God. She even notices that this God, she even maybe calls out to this God. And she's not throwing shade at her more beautiful sister. She's just seeing that God is now bringing my relationship full circle and bringing the heart of my husband back to me. Well, Rachel sees that she's not having kids, and Leah is, and starts going to Jacob in anger, saying, either give me children or I die. And Jacob's like, what can I do about this? So why don't you take Bilhah, my handmaid, and then she'll have children for me. Who did that beforehand? Sarah. So you get the idea. We see patterns here. When Leah needed something, she called out to Jehovah. When Rachel needs something, she goes to herself. She goes and figures it out in her mind. She goes and finds a way to shortcut around. One thing you'll notice very clear is all through the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and later on with the boys, you'll find shortcuts or God's way. And you'll see these people trying to take shortcuts. Well, I need a baby. I'm mad. I'm not getting what I want out of this situation. You take Bilhah. So Bilhah conceives, and she says, Elohim has judged me and heard my voice and has given me a son. So she's being a little tough here. I mean, a little mean-spirited. Look, Elohim. She doesn't use the word Jehovah. She does later when Joseph is born, but she does it in a different context. But she's crediting the God of creation, which is fine. But very often people visualize the God of creation different than Jehovah God of the Bible. And so here we have Bilhah has Dan, and then Bilhah has a second son, and Rachel calls his name Naphtali. Naphtali is because with great wrestling, I've wrestled with my sister. Great. Are you giving credit to God? Are you giving credit to Jehovah? Or is this because of some tension between you and your sister? I don't find anywhere where Leah is throwing tension back. I see where Rachel is throwing tension against her sister, and she's supposed to be the pretty one. She's supposed to be the one that everybody looked to. And yet here she is throwing all this tension back. Leah starts to get into the game and decides that to give more sons for Jacob, because she was now becoming barren, or she thought. She has her maid Zilpah go in with Jacob, and Jacob has a son. And his name is Gad, which means a troop. Once again, not a shade at Rachel, not anything about I'm better than you, or look, here's another one. The Lord is blessing my Lord, Jacob, with a troop. He's getting a troop of boys, so and through me. And then Zilpah has another son called Asher. Asher means happy. Blessed and happy. Oh my gosh, I'm so ecstatic that we're getting more sons for Jacob. And again, you find the heart of Leah. It seems to be softer and more about the family structure than Rachel. But they do have this little falling out. Reuben has gone out to the wheat harvest and found some mandrakes. Mandrakes at that time might have been considered an aphrodisiac, or it might have been considered something that increases fertility. So Rachel goes to Leah and says, give me the mandrakes. And she goes, is it a small thing that you've taken my husband, that you'll now take away my son's mandrakes? And then they barter for an evening with Jacob. You give me the mandrakes, you can have Jacob tonight. Fine. So Leah goes out and grabs Jacob and says, I have hired thee for my son's mandrakes. And they have intercourse. But God hearkens to Leah, and again hearkens to Leah. Once again, look at the wording. As an evidentiary Christian, look at the wording. He hearkens to Leah, which tells me that Leah is doing some praying to Jehovah. So he's not just relying on luck or Jacob's relationship. And Leah says, God has given me my hire because I have given my maid to my husband, and he calls the son Issachar. And she conceived Jacob's sixth son. And Leah said, God has endured me with a good dowry. So he calls his name Zebulun. Once again, a good dowry. There's always positiveness coming from Leah here, And after which she has a daughter named Diana, and which means judgment. God is in judgment, is fulfilling his obligations. God remembered Rachel and hearkened to her and opened her womb. Now remember, we're looking at Elohim here. God is not heartless. The Elohim God of creation is not heartless. But the covenant is through Jehovah. So I believe that God does answer the prayers. God, Elohim, the creator God, the God over the universe, he will answer prayers. He's not heartless. He is merciful. But do you see the mercy of God and go to Jehovah? That's the question. Do you see the mercy of God and go to Jehovah? So we have this happening here, that God remembered. And then one thing I'd like to say about remembered is the fact that God doesn't forget things. It isn't like God, all of a sudden, I have something on the stove, There is timing issues with God. And sometimes the timing of God is better at a certain time. and it's his time to Joseph to be born. Maybe everything would have happened with the boys and later on with Pharaoh. He's setting up the timing of Joseph to get in and be at Pharaoh's place at just the right time and be there to function as a savior of the family at just the right time. So we have to also allow for God's timing in situations. We see this with Elizabeth. We also saw this with Hannah. So we can't always attribute things to, well, God's just up there rolling dice and he's got a plan here. And she says his name is Joseph. The Lord has added to me another son. But the way she uses the word Yahweh here is almost in, now your God is even on my side. He's adding me a son. Not only is the God giving me children, your God is giving me children. It's like, Rachel, you're killing me here. And then we have Jacob starts bartering with Laban. And I love this part because Jacob is God is helping Jacob with some insight. And in this insight, Jacob's going to be making some bank. God is setting things up with Jacob so that he can have some provision for when he's going to go around and move his family out. So he goes up and he wants to be sent away that I might go to my country, give me my wives and kids. And Laban's like, if I found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me through that. He's still throwing shade. He's still being the smoozer. He's still being the smooth talker. Oh, I know that I've been blessed because of you, Jacob. Oh, I understand that I have nothing. You know, he's playing those games. And you'll see him play this several times. This is what the smoozer is about. But Jacob standing firm. He's like, you know, I need some wages. What can we do? So what would you like me to do is what Laban finally tells Jacob. And Jacob goes, here's the deal. I'll take a flock and I'll move over here 3 days away. And I'll take some spotted. I'll take all kinds of sheep. Here's the deal. If any of them are white, you get to keep them. And you will consider them stolen and you can have them for free. I get to keep everything else. And Jacob and Laban's probably thinking, man, what a dummy. You know, this is a 50-50 thing. Either it'll be white or it won't be white. So he goes, behold, I would it be according to your word. So they were going to take speckled and spotted and striped sheep, and there'd be some white. And if any of them have any white, any full white, they get to go back to Laban for free. But he doesn't realize that what God has revealed to Jacob is a little bit of rudimentary genetics. If you remember that from biology, when we were in high school, it's the fact that you remember the simple, like if you're dealing with black and white, black sheep and white sheep, you have a 25% of just black, you've got a 25% of just white, and you've got a 50% of either getting black and white or white and black. So we all understand this, that Laban actually went from 50% to actually only 25%. So he had a 1 in 4 chance of getting something that he could keep, while Jacob would have a 3 in 4 chance. But it does get worse than that. They're actually dealing with the fact that you have speckled sheep, grizzled sheep, striped sheep, and white sheep. And the idea is that you could get, you know, that's 1 in 4, but you could get a speckled and a grizzled, or a speckled and a stripe, or you could have got a grizzled and a stripe, or you could have got a speckled grizzled stripe. So actually, this goes down to 1 1/8. But it gets worse than that. If you're taking out the white ones every time and keeping these, your probabilities are going up more because you're adding more speckled, grizzled, and striped to your herd, and you're always weaning out the whites. But it gets even worse than that. God also had revealed to him in a dream, which he'll talk about in the next chapter, where take some rods of poplar, hazelnut, chestnut, and pull them out and put them into the streams right where they're eating and drinking, and they're going to drink in that. That'll make the water more sugary. It's also, that's known for having leargine. It's known for having nitrous oxide. It kind of makes the animals more randy, if you will, and all of a sudden they're going to be wanting to procreate more. And then what happens is you don't put these rods in front of the sheep that you don't want procreating as much. So if you have any weaker ones here or feeble, if you have any that are white, they get to eat and drink over here, but you're putting the rods over here. Another thing that's happening is you're working with the design of these animals. A ram, on a good day, can impregnate 5 ewes, or at least attempt to, in one day. So a ram you will have a lot of this going on. And also the gestation period of many sheep is only about 6 to 8 months or less. So you could have a faster turnover with the ewes. And with this mechanism in place, Jacob's able to grow his area, to grow his resources, to grow his economy, and he's taking from, actually, Laban. Laban is getting less white sheep. He's getting more grizzled. Later on, there is a factor where God is working in the probabilities. He isn't just leaving it up to chance. If Laban says, I want the speckled sheep, then they have striped sheep. I want the striped sheep, they'll have speckled sheep. God is working against the master trickster. But he also using science and design. And where I go with this, sometimes we as Christians, we're so guilty of just, praying and waiting. No, look at your design. Look at what's going on. If you're praying for your finances, sit down and see if you can save $10. If you're praying about your marriage, sit down and try to have a conversation with your wife or your husband. If there's a struggle with the family, pray about it and then put some action to it. Look at the design. What are people wanting? What are they needing? If you need a better job, pray for a better job. But how can you make yourself more marketable? How can you be more valuable at your work? But we see that God works with science. Science is not anti-God. In fact, many of the greatest scientific advancements came from men who loved God. So what I'm saying here, God has shown this wonderful science. And I don't know if he explained it to this depth with Jacob, probably he didn't. But we see it. We see God working within the design. So let's look at the design. Let's look at the structure. And God wants to bless. Sometimes the only thing keeping me from a blessing of God is me doing a little hard work myself. We'll also find out later that this was a 6-year period that he did this. He worked 7 years for Rachel. Then he worked 7 more years for Rachel, basically. Then he worked 6 years. So he's got about 20 years, 2 decades that he's doing this in. Sometimes also we want stuff right off the bat, and that's not how that works. So anyway, think about all of this. I think it's a lot of fun.